Well, Peter, thanks very much for coming down and playing.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, very much so. Now, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
This is a burning question of mine. What do you see as the difference in the terms jazz and improvisation?
Well, jazz improvisation, as I came into it, was learning to extemporize on standards. That was it. And it had been like that since the advent of jazz. And then in 1949, someone who I became closely associated with, Lenny Tristano, he made a couple of sides, just 3 minute, 78 sides, with totally free improvisation, but group. And they were the very first. And it made a bit of a fuss. This was in New York, and then it was forgotten about. 10 years later, Ornette Coleman came along, and his thing enabled that idea to be established, even though Lenny had done it that much earlier. So, what I like to do in improvisation is to do both, improvise on standards and also just pre-improvisation.
Yeah.
The problem is that it's easy just to make notes on an instrument and then say this is great music. It might be, but it might not be.
Yeah.
So I think what we have in jazz today is a whole spectrum of playing, some of which is improvised, some of which is composed. Not all of it is great, and I think there are a few people around who just think, oh, we can do this and get away with it. So it's kind of muddied the water, as it were.
Yes.
But with careful listening, you can tell
sure.
that is valid, and that's just ego, you know.
Sure, yeah, that's ego. Well, I'm wondering if the use of the distinction between the terms jazz or improvisation are useful in dissecting the truthful statements or the egotistical statements from the truthful statements, or not, or if that's...
It's just, I think it's too early days, you know. When it was simpler, it was much easier to have a pattern and people say, yeah, they recognise this, they don't recognise it. Today, it's like all the balls are in the air. So it's up to us as individuals, and I don't think there's any real consensus at this point, because sometimes people laud stuff which, to my ear, is not worth it. And other times they ignore things that I think they should say, hey, well, hang on, listen to this. You know.
It's tricky times.
It is, yeah.
Very, very tricky times, yeah.
But out of that can come the real new approach to music, you know.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, we this week we heard Brad Meldau, you know, incredible, the trio, you know, very different, different than the idiom that I was brought up in, but fascinating and very skilled, and for real.
Yeah.
Last night we heard Sheila Jordan, who I've now known for 60 years in New York, you know.
Yeah, sure.
We've always kept in touch and played various times. And she's still doing her thing, you know, it's wonderful, you know. So she's 84 on Sunday.
Nice. Congratulations, Sheila. Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, and truthful music is truthful music.
That's right. So, because there's no agreed consensus, that's an advantage in a way, but also a disadvantage, because what do you latch onto? You just have to listen and say, I love this, and people say, who is that? Yeah. And sometimes things are not recognised, or sometimes they're overblown, you know.
And I actually, personally, I feel that the fact that this is all taking place, that there's this expression is taking place in what's known as the free market, in a sense, makes it even harder in a way, because it's so, as you say, the balls are all in the air. It's a free market. It's all about throwing things out there.
Yeah.
All the other attendant issues to do with producing music, the marketing of it, when you get to hear about it or not. As you say, people making a fuss. Who might be making a fuss? This seems to make it a very complex.
Now, there's another point that I have, is that because we live in such a technical era, a lot of the young musicians are becoming extremely proficient. But this doesn't always address the thing of commitment to the music itself as coming from the heart. And whenever I'm teaching, I'm just saying it's got to be from the heart. Yeah, you can fly all over the place, but it's got to be from the heart. And that has to do with energy, biological energy, what you put into it, energetic-wise. And I've become, well, for many years now, very involved in looking at the reality of cosmic energy, which ultimately is the energy of life. It's not yet understood. So I've got a personal, what do you call it, a road to tread to try to get some. And
to get to the end of that, understand that concept,
Before we go, take one of my books and have a look at it somewhere, because we're straying from just from the music itself, but everything now it's got to be scientific. But what is not generally realized is the censorship of science. If science serves the powers that be, it's accepted. If it doesn't, it's ignored. That's a huge challenge,
Well, interestingly, to me, that seems a little bit like what I'm talking about, whether some music gets through, let's say, to a wider audience, or
This week we had 2 meetings with the Musicians Union, and they're trying to, how do we get the media involved? How do we do this? How do we do that? And I said, look, you might get them involved, you might not. You can spend a lot of energy trying to do it to no avail, but if you concentrate on the validity of the playing, that's what's going to get through eventually.
I guess that is what's valid as well.
That's right.
Playing is playing. I wanted to ask you this question, actually. When I was growing up and learning about this music, the concept of tradition was, and I think still is, a very big deal. Now, seeing as you started playing this music in America in the 50s, or even late 40s, I wonder what the concept of tradition means to you.
Well, I remember, for example, New York in the 50s, playing alongside Louis Armstrong. And Louis Armstrong, a lot of the boppers said, oh, well, Louis, they had a certain respect. But, Louis. But you stand next to Louis when he was playing, and the energy was incredible. And that's what I'm talking about. To be able, and with all the great artists, they draw the energy. The audience gives the energy, they radiate it back. I never had the pleasure of standing next to guys like Sinatra, but I think of Louis, I think of Roy Eldridge, who was just an incredible player, and Bird. It was the combination of creativity and this total energy commitment.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Well, that's a good take on tradition, I think. Energy. Well, I mean, something also that's continuous.
And we can go back.
Yeah, of course.
Years ago, there was a guy from, he was living in New York, Richard Sudholter, who died a couple of years ago, very young, had cancer, and just that was it, or a stroke, or whatever. But he was interested in the early music, and he wrote a book about Bix Beiderbecke, who was his idol.
Sure.
And that involved the Paul Whiteman Band, and so the book Bits Man and Legend became a bestseller, and in the course of that he had got permission to use the Whiteman arrangements from the 20s. And this was about early 60s, or maybe late 60s. And he put a band together which we rehearsed at the American School in St. John's Wood. And the thing about the Whiteman band, there was all this thing about racial music and whether white guys could... It was all that bullshit that went on. Music's music, you know. And whatever Whiteman was as an individual, he managed to get that sound, which was unique. And nobody had ever heard the sound except on scratchy 78 records.
Yeah.
And when that band struck up in the classroom in the American School, the sound was amazing. Nobody, including the players, had heard that as it was written. And then we did some concerts and some records. So it goes back, and I think we're getting past this terrible thing of this racial argument, because music is music. Lenny Tristano was very aware that in the late 40s, the black music was disregarded except by the black fraternity. And he said, that's where the energy is, that's where the creativity is, and he was right. And then that became fashionable, and the other things in music became unfashionable. And my message is, listen to it all, enjoy it all, and forget all the trends, the racial things. No mind, it's the music, you know.
Well, it is. That's what got us here in the first place.
That's right.
I mean, that's why we're all here. Yeah, you're right. Well, that's interesting. You're talking. I wanted to ask you this actually, not so much about music now or then, but in fact audiences. And as you're talking about energy, I know that Art Pepper in his sleeve notes, The Way It Was, talks about a time when jazz musicians like himself were playing on the West Coast to really engaged audiences.
That's right.
And which he felt really fed the music. And he was saying, well, that was then, and it's over with. There is no longer that kind of jazz audience. Do you feel what he's saying was true?
Well, I think it's gone through a period where, we've heard it all before kind of attitude. And the younger people, I mean, starting, if you like, with the Beatles, they went in a different direction. And they created things, and the whole pop thing is creative music.
Sure.
But, so jazz went into eclipse. But the recordings are still there, and this brings me to another point. There were two meetings of the Musicians' Union this week. What do we do about it? And like I just said to you, I said, you know, you can try to get the media interested, but you can't get the BBC interested. Tough. The BBC, we feel, should be paying attention, but if they don't, what can you do? But when you come to play, it's that which will carry through. And if people don't take notice, it's there. If it's been recorded, it's there for the future. So not to worry so much about the lack of an audience or the blasé attitudes toward jazz. Just keep doing it.
Keep doing it. Keep recording.
That's right.
Keep having a self-referential sort of energy cycle, if you like.
And it puts a challenge to the musicians, because the musicians jazz musicians, the majority of them can't rely on great adulation and claps on the back. They just got to do it from what they are.
Sure, yeah.
And that's a challenge.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Yeah. It certainly is a challenge. I find it a challenge.
Yes, it is.
Now, last night actually I was listening to a duo recording you made with Sal Mosca.
Right.
In the club in
the Den. Yeah,
in the Den. That's right, in the Den. 59. See what an amazing date that is, 1959. And I also recently heard an interview with Bill Evans in Finland in 1970. He was talking about how impressed he was with some Finnish musicians, a Finnish quartet. He was saying, that's in 1970, he was saying that they were very good, given that he felt they didn't really have the right kind of environment in Finland to develop the music.
Yeah.
Now, I wonder if jazz can happen in Europe, or has it happened in Europe, and whether that's a really important the business. I mean, I know we've talked about the race thing,
yeah,
but I also wonder about the, let's call it the time and space thing, and the fact that, you know, America is America. It's the cradle of jazz.
Well, I think it was the coming together of the races, and for whatever reason, America was the core of almost everything in our civilization for a while. Now the general opinion is America's past its peak. I can't judge that, but you know, it produced so much, and in the guys you mentioned in Finland, I'm sure they'd heard the American music, and so the influence was there. But if they didn't have the environment, it's a challenge for them.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean they can't do it.
No, but it is a challenge. And I suppose that's always the statement that's made by, let's say, American musicians as well. It's a challenge to make music in America too. It's always a challenge to make this music.
And it's also a challenge today.
Yeah, and a challenge
because,
today.
it's more the commercial end of the music thing, and it's hard for musicians in America as jazz musicians. And a lot of them just turn to teaching, which is great, but it's not the same. I mean, when I was living in New York, we just played, and there were gigs every night in the week. You didn't earn a fortune, but you always made a living, and you were appreciated.
That's sort of the kind of sense that I got from that recording of you and Sal, is a kind of fluency, let's say, or a kind of second nature. You know, there was you both seem very, very comfortable with the material.
Yes. And it was standards.
Well, yeah, sure. Standard, which I guess you should be comfortable. One can be comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, there's still all that openness to explore, even on standards, you know.
Well, exactly.
And that's mostly what we've been doing tonight.
Yeah.
Because I played with Yaz and with Dave.
Yeah.
We're not rehearsing, partly because I don't have that many gigs, and if I do too much playing earlier on, it's a tough on the fingers, so I have to monitor myself. I've had to come to grips with age, you know. 84 is a time where you've got all your faculties, but physically you've got to be a little careful sometimes, you know. Yeah. So, I mean, Sal died a couple of years ago. So many of the guys are gone, you know. It's just, you know, the puzzle for me is, what is it about life that you keep learning and learning, and then the physical weakness begins to overtake. So you've got all this inside, and you better hurry to get it out there. You know, that's the challenge that I have personally. At 84, I've still got a lot to say, and I find myself being tired in the morning.
No, well, I can believe it. Shit, I can believe it. All that shit. It's real shit.
It is. Yeah. And so, who made the laws? I didn't.
Yeah. No, it's a strange.
But I'm trying to overcome the negative aspect of it.
Sure. It is cruel.
Keep the energy going.
Yeah.
Breathing, exercising, fresh air, good food. I can't afford to indulge alcohol like I used to. It used to not bother me, and now it's got to be careful, you know.
Well, I'm pleased you're still here. I'm pleased you're
I'll be around for a while.
Yeah, great. And I'm looking forward to tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Red Simmons.